Welcome back. The impact of the COVID-19 pandemic enforced lockdown in 2020 is still being analysed. Now, a study in the Public Journal of Science has focused on how it affected South Africa's women academics.
It's very interesting because it finds working from home during the first 6 months of lockdown was increasingly stressful due to heavy workloads, domestic pressures, as well as inadequate workspaces, leaving them feeling burnt out. Let's discuss this further with the Department of Education Policy Studies at Stellenbosch Business School's Dr. Cyril Walters. Dr. Cyril, thank you so much for your time and a very good morning to you. You know, sometimes when we look back at COVID-19 as well as the subsequent lockdowns and interventions that had to be put in place, what we tend to neglect is the impact that it had on civil society, you know, on academics who've had to teach classes online, but they themselves were being spent out just simply because of the amount of dedication, time, and even focus that was needed during their tenure. Talk to us a little bit about some of these revelations.
Good morning. Absolutely. So thank you for having me. I think what we realized in this study was just the extent and the severity for academic women working from home. And what we see is a massive unequal outcome. And so besides, you know, just being confined, cohabiting, co-working with your family, we see that there was an increase in workloads, both administratively. We see that the transition from in-person teaching to online teaching took its toll on women. And so we see that teaching administration effectively displaced research for female academics. We are in a system where research is critical to promotion, to success of women. And so we see that there is going to be a trickling effect in terms of our future because of what happened during the pandemic to female academics.
Doctor, we'll be of the assumption that it's improved, it's gotten better with this, of course, given the fact that COVID-19 itself as a pandemic has become a little less severe. But how has it gotten better? What measures, if any, have been put in place to ensure that the circumstances for women academics has gotten better?
Well, we don't know if it's gotten better. What we can see is that there's been no policy changes. You know, our universities haven't shifted significantly. Neither have they just recognized the gendered effect of the home as a workspace. And so as much as the study looked at the lockdown in terms of the first 6 months, anecdotally, when I go out and I talk to women, we see that they are still struggling. They are still trying to catch up because none of the deadlines shifted. Okay, none of what was required was shifted. And so we see that things haven't improved significantly, but we are doing a follow-up study to see if things have changed 2 years later.
Sure. You know, as you're speaking about this point, Dr. Cyril, I also want to just zero in a little bit on women, because unfortunately there's even been studies by the Harvard Business School or even the Business Review speaking about how we're seeing this mass exodus of women in positions of leadership and influence simply because of the pressures, the added on pressures of having to take care of the home. What we tend to neglect is that these academics are also mothers. These academics have got children, they're homemakers, they're wives, many instances. And coupled with the demands from work, without any form of boundaries being set because of this COVID-19 pandemic and the subsequent working from home, how were they able to become mothers and wives and just human and women at the end of the day?
I speak for myself here. My son was 4 years old during the pandemic, and, you know, being at home means access and availability. We had mothers who, you know, like myself, had toddlers. We had moms who had children in high school, which was a complete shift for the entire family. And then we also have women without children who often faced many other problems not related to childcare and parenting responsibilities, like looking after older parents, looking after older relatives. And this affected their personal well-being. You know, it created fear, it created frustration. We also see that women without children often felt the need and the guilt to look and nurture students. Our student body was struggling severely. Often students could only access their lectures, their data at night because of the plan that they were on. And so we read about many of our academics where students through the struggles that they're doing. And so we see that our female academics, they're wrecked with guilt that they're not meeting work deadlines, guilt that they're at home, but they're actually not being fully present for their family, for their children. And so we feel, we see that this guilt was, and we refer to it as academic guilt, and it manifests itself in various ways, was very prevalent. And I agree with you. We talk about this mass exodus of females in the workforce in North America, in Europe, and that is what we're trying to ascertain in terms of post-pandemic, now that we know the extent and the severity of the lockdown on our workforce.
Just before we let you go, Dr. Cyril, I want to ask this particular question because I feel it is important in terms of a factor in the reason why it was a nightmare for women during the lockdown period. How much does GBV play in that, if at all?
It came up. It came up, and it's something that we are going to follow up, but GBV was exacerbated. We all know, it was no secret, that before the pandemic, the other pandemic was GBV. And women faced a unique set of challenges in terms of GBV. The extent of that, we haven't studied, but we are going to do that in a follow-up study. It did come up. The severity of that still needs to be codified and quantified. But thank you for asking.
Yeah, it certainly is one of those revelations that we need to be cognizant of as a country so that we do not repeat perhaps even the same mistakes should we ever have a case of another pandemic. But much appreciated for your time from the Department of Education Policy Studies at Stellenbosch Business Schools, Dr. Cyril Walters, on that matter.